Bonjour, good morning.
So, welcome. And now I'm going to take off my name. I am Jean Lebel. I am the president of International Development Research Center, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here this morning and to be able to welcome you and to also welcome our distinguished guests. I am convinced that this is going to be a very interesting and informative session, and it's going to give us perhaps a different point of view, different from what we might think about innovation in Africa.
Let me first start by thanking you for being here. There is a simultaneous translation available. I see some people with their headset. And let me also welcome the chair of our Board of Governors, Mr. Monty Solberg, that is sitting here in the audience. And Monty, thanks for being in Montreal, flying from Calgary for this event. It's highly appreciated. Before we begin the session, I want to give you a brief overview of IDRC, the International Development Research Center, and explain some of our work in support of science and innovation in Africa. And don't worry, I won't take half an hour. This is why they are scripting me. Essentially, IDRC is a crown corporation. We belong to the Foreign Affairs family of the Government of Canada. We receive 75% of our funding from the Parliament of Canada, and we raise support from partnership with private philanthropy, the private sector, as well as multilateral and bilateral organizations for another 25%. And what do we do with this money? We sponsor research. We provide research support to researchers and organizations that are mostly based in developing region of the world globally. We do this through all kind of modality, competitive grant, direct grant. I won't get into the details, but we are often doing this also in partnership with Canadian organizations or other organizations. We do it in health, agriculture, social economic policy, science and technology, and it's science and technology that brings us today. We invest in research and institutions, and we do this in order to have results that are generated locally or nationally in these countries by researchers that have the best view and knowledge of their situation, and through partnership can bring expertise and develop further their research and have result that leads to outcome, hopefully, that will influence policy in order to have a better world. Welcome, Mr. Clark, former Prime Minister of Canada. Bienvenue. The Centre over the years have been able to work with current and future leaders in science. But these people become other things. Sometimes they go in academia, sometimes they go in business, sometimes they go in politics. And to illustrate this, Monday night, I was at a dinner, and the Prime Minister of Burkina Faso, Monsieur Thiaw, came to me and says, "Thank you, Jean." I said, "Thank you, yes." I received a grant from IDRC in the 80s. I did my master in communication with your support. And we didn't introduce each other because he says, "Thank you, Jean." So I was listening. And I said, "I'm sorry. I'm Jean Lebel, but who are you?" "Oh, I'm the Prime Minister of Burkina Faso." I'm bringing this illustration not to say that, our money will lead to Prime Minister or President. But I'm using this anecdote, and there's numbers of others, to show that an investment in research does not necessarily pay on the short term. It may transform, in result of a research project, but it may have outcomes that are far beyond what we would think. In Africa, for example, in the 90s, in order to help South Africa to transit towards a non-apartheid government, the Canadian government and IDRC worked together in order to sponsor research in all kinds of fields: water management, justice system, reform of institutions, trade, finance. And we brought, people from South Africa, the diaspora, to Canada, to Chile, that was going through similar process, to Mozambique. And when Nelson Mandela appointed his first cabinet, more than half of the ministers were recipients of IDRC support during their career. Another illustration that you cannot predict what research is going to be leading to in terms of leadership, but I wanted to bring you this as an illustration of the type of work that we're doing. Et le CRDI reçoit son financement du ministère des Affaires étrangères.
We get our financing from Foreign Affairs and Development Canada, and we also use that money to raise money. We have a leverage factor of $1, so $1 actually raises $4. In the past years, these partnerships, either with the Gates Foundation or the ULID, or governments like the British government, the Canadian government, the Australian government, the Norwegian government, we've been able to raise $70 million more that will go directly into research. So this partnership spirit is very real and very effective to have joint agendas like we have in many sectors. And one of these sectors deals with education, innovation, and trade, because that is the very basis of the development pyramid. This is something I repeat often because the Governor General uses this term a lot. Education, innovation, commercial trade. These are the three pillars of a triangle. And we use this approach to work in the agriculture field. In India, millet almost disappeared.
Small millet in India almost disappeared. Why? Green Revolution technology that we have contributed to develop put a high emphasis on wheat, rice, and maize. This almost displaced, the small millet that was 20% of acreage at that time in the 60s. Highly nutritious, easy to cultivate, tolerant to stress like water, like drought. And today, after almost 10 years of investment of the Canadian government with IDRC, with former CEDA, and now with the FADD, we are reintroducing it. It's nutritious, it's cheap, and it serves, a purpose of food security that is at the prime of our interest in Canada when we think about international development. It will come as no surprise to you that science, technology, and innovation are key drivers of economic growth. And a number of African countries are following that path and growing rapidly. And Canada is working to support them in numbers of areas. For example, the Mouton Declaration that was ratified some 10 years ago was asking African countries to dedicate 10% of all their budget to agricultural development. To date, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea, Malawi, Mali, Niger, and Senegal have exceeded that target, and most countries have significant progress made towards that goal of food security. So it's not only the Canadian support, it's the national support that is also mobilized in order to fix problems. IDRC has helped in the science and technology domain, has helped, for example, Mozambique to develop its national science and technology policy as well as its information communication technology policy. We are currently working with Granting Council and similar organizations in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, to see what are the challenges of the future. How these countries can develop their economy with clear science and technology agenda, where they are coming to the table not asking for money because we need money, but saying if we want to have control of our development, these are the avenues in science and technology that we want to use. And I think this is very stimulating.
Africa is perhaps the new El Dorado of trade. You would know that better than I. And collaboration opportunities will increase as these countries continue investing in innovation.
Through our presence in the region and our work with partner and Canadian embassies, we are witnessing important changes in emerging African markets. New agencies are being established to fund science and spur innovation. There is increasing collaboration between funding agency and government department and between funding agency of neighboring country as well as with the private sector. One particularly exciting example that I witnessed in Nairobi with the University of Nairobi is a partnership with a private philanthropy from Kenya to develop incubator. And up to now, there's been 50 startups at this incubator that have been rolled out. How many will survive, we don't know. But the spur for innovation is quite important and vibrant, and some of our panelists will highlight some of these examples today. So on that note, and because I said I was not going to be long, but I've already been too long, I'm going to welcome our Director of Science, Technology, and Innovation at the International Development Research Center, Mr. Naser Faruqui, that would moderate this panel. So, Naser, if you want the microphone. Thank you. Thank you all.
Merci, Jean. Je suis ravi
Very pleased to be with you here today. Before beginning, I just want to tell you that this session will be recorded and will be available on the YouTube page of the IDRC. So we'll begin with the introduction of our guests.
First, we have Johann Mouton, who is the director of the Center for Research on Evaluation, Science and Technology at Stellenbosch University and the Department for Science and Technology National Research Foundation Center of Excellence in Scientometrics and STI Policy. He's also the program director of 5 postgraduate programs in evaluation and science and technology studies. He is widely published and sits on the editorial boards of several international journals, including Science and Public Policy and Science, Technology, and Society. Johann was elected to the Academy of Science of South Africa Council in 2012. To Johann's left, we have Juliana Rotich. Juliana is the co-founder and executive director of the open source software Ushahidi and advisor of iHub, a collective tech space in Nairobi, Kenya. She is a TED Senior Fellow, an MI Media Lab Director's Fellow, and is the chair for the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Data-Driven Development. Juliana was recognized by Fortune magazine as a global leader in 2014 and the World Economic Forum's Social Entrepreneur of the Year in 2011. And finally, we have Thierry Zomahoun. As founding executive director, Thierry Zomahoun is leading the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences Next Einstein Initiative. It's a groundbreaking project designed to develop a pan-African scientific network of centers of excellence, providing cutting-edge postgraduate training and research in mathematical sciences. In 3 years, AIMS has expanded from 1 center to a network of 5, with nearly 200 of Africa's brightest mathematical scientists graduating each year. And Thierry is also advising the UK government on its trade and investment strategies in Africa. So before we hear from these impressive panelists, let me take a few minutes to frame our discussion. Africa is the next frontier for trade. Surprised? You shouldn't be. With weak economic outlooks in industrialized countries, global growth is going to depend on trade with developing countries. And after East Asia, Africa is the fastest growing region in the world. Over the past decade, trade between Africa and China has increased from 10 billion to 170 billion. Stock markets in sub-Saharan Africa have led the world over the last 5 years, and according to the Financial Times, private equity managers are more excited about Africa than the emerging economies of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And the International Monetary Fund predicts that between 2010 and 2020, 10 of the world's fastest growing 20 economies will be African economies. Now, this may not be as surprising as it seems. Africa has 15% of the world's population, 20% of its natural resources, and only 3% of global GDP. So the continent's potential is no longer limited, as it has been historically, to natural resources exports. And opportunities are growing as Africa increases its investment in science and innovation. So some examples. Rwanda, which is only 20 years away from the brutal civil war, was among the 10 countries whose economies grew fastest between 2000 and 2010. It's easier to start a business in Rwanda than in Switzerland or Singapore. An African consortium, together with Australia, is building the world's radio telescope, one of the world's mega science infrastructure projects. Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, and Senegal have all performed very well recently on innovation indices. M-Pesa, an innovative banking platform that pioneered mobile banking, was invented in Kenya and boasts 21 million users in Kenya and Tanzania. And iHub, a Nairobi-based technology incubator supported, I'm proud to say, in part by Canada's International Development Research Centre, has spawned 150 companies in 3 years. And Fast Company named it in 2014 one of the world's 50 most innovative companies. The African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, funded, again I'm proud, by a $20 million grant from the Canadian government and implemented by IDRC, is providing the best training to the best students from across the continent. And its vision is a very inspiring one, to find the next Einstein in Africa and fill the skills gap necessary to sustain Africa's economic growth. These are encouraging signs, but constraints remain, including weak science and technology capacity and a lack of collaboration among African countries. And there's also poor knowledge related to local needs. For example, the HIV drugs being developed in the West don't treat the HIV strain that prevails in Africa. So continent-wide, Africa has seen an average growth of 5% this year and is poised for 6% in 2015. But there's undoubtedly going to be ups and downs. Growth rarely occurs in a straight line. But prospects for long-term growth do look good, especially if it builds on the investments that Africa itself has made in science and innovation. And industrialized countries will want to sustain this growth for their own good and for Africa's good. The ongoing transformation offers opportunities for universities, for granting councils, and the private sector to collaborate with Africa, and it offers opportunities for Canada and other countries to secure prosperity, mutual prosperity, by developing strong partners with whom to innovate and trade. So with that, I will now turn it over to the panelists for a series of short presentations, and then we'll follow with a discussion. So Johann, I'm going to ask you to start.
Thank you, Naser, for the introduction. Thank you, President of the IDRC, Jean Lebel, for the invitation. It allowed me to come to Montreal, a beautiful city, for the third time. Of course, the per diem that IDRC is paying is too short for me to see the whole city, but perhaps, perhaps the next time. My brief, I should say I come from Cape Town, so we have a fantastic benchmarking city when we look at Montreal. My brief has been to talk about science in Africa rather than on innovation, but of course, if there are questions, I can take that. My talk is really about two stories and two phases. If you look at science in Africa and you look at the last 40 years, the first 30 years between 1970 and 2000 could be characterized as a legacy of neglect. And we can elaborate on that, but let me just give you 3 or 4 pieces of information. The World Bank policies of the 1970s and 80s prioritized, as far as Africa is concerned, basic education. In fact, policy documents from the bank referred to higher education in Africa as a luxury, which meant that many governments in Africa did not spend enough on higher education in universities. And I should say that universities are crucial in Africa because they're the biggest producers of knowledge. There is very little private R&D in terms of industry and business sector. As many of you will know, the 1970s, 80s also saw a huge amount of political instability and many civil wars in Africa. And science does not flourish when there's political instability. And thirdly, this led to a huge problem because this was also the same time after the independence of the 1950s and 60s, of the growth in higher education. We saw a 3-4-fold increase in university enrollments in the 70s and 80s. And this came at the time that expenditure on higher education was cut. So invariably, you would find that university labs, university lecture rooms could not deal with this huge influx of higher education students. Now, one of the biggest consequences of that, as we all know, was the huge brain drain from Africa. Just two statistics that you will see on the slide. It's estimated that between 1965 and 85, 67,000 highly skilled professionals, academic scientists left the African continent. And at that point in time, it was estimated that there were more scientists, African scientists, working in the USA and elsewhere than in Africa. And you know, this is a huge impact of these policies. This resulted, as far as science and technology is concerned, in scientific institutions being deinstitutionalized. Institutions became fragile. Laboratories were not maintained. And expenditure on R&D pretty much stopped. It also led to another factor, which is still the case, and that is a huge dependence on international funding for R&D. And you must remember that when a university or a research institute depends on international funding, the agenda for funding is set by the international agencies for most of the time, whether it's agriculture or health or social sciences, and not by national priorities. So there are many consequences of that. One of the interesting consequences that we study is the lack of the visibility of African science. African science really disappeared from the radar screen. So this is the years between 1970 and 2000. Now, have things changed? Well, I was a bit naughty. I decided to show you these very optimistic cover pages of Time and Economist, which talks about Africa rising. I don't think African science is rising, but I do think that tide is turning. And I want to show you just 3 or 4 slides to support this claim. So not completely optimistic, but cautiously optimistic. Sound like a bit like a politician. So governance of science. Jean already referred to the fact. We've done various studies, my center in Africa, which shows that there is a new commitment to science and technology by African ministers of science and technology. In 2007, the Ministers' Conference of Science and Technology committed expenditure on R&D 1% of GDP. And although the average for Africa is sitting at about 0.545%, there are about 10 countries that are sitting at higher percentages than that. We've seen the establishment of dedicated ministries for science and technology. We've seen the establishment of dedicated councils for science and innovation in many African countries. And we've seen in the last 10 years, pretty much in every sub-Saharan African country, a revision of their science policies to look at new grand challenges. So that's the commitment at a governance level. We did a study about 2 years ago for the World Bank, quite ironically, for the Higher Education Initiative, where they asked us to map initiatives that train and support research and capacity building in Africa. We mapped, and you are welcome to that database, nearly 120 initiatives over the last 20, 30 years, but the bulk of that since 2000. And I'm talking about agencies from CEDA, DFID, Danida, Rockefeller, Gates, who are investing in higher education. We have never seen such a huge increase in investment in higher education, R&D, and science institutions before. 2 very specific examples, just to give an indication. About 2 months ago, GlaxoSmithKline announced a major grant and an investment in sub-Saharan Africa to invest in 2 factories, plants for drug development in Kenya and Nigeria. But it's quite interesting. This investment, 130 million British pound, is not just about setting up these R&D labs, but quite interestingly also to support 25 chairs in drug development, vaccine development at African universities. This is an investment that links the innovation side to the science side. The same World Bank that declared higher education to be a luxury 30, 40 years ago have just announced pretty much a month ago that they will invest in $150 million in 19 university-based centers of excellence in West African countries in fields of science, agriculture, food security, and related fields. So these are what is interesting about these investments is they are investments in the institutions of science and innovation. Are we seeing the impact of some of investments? Let me just give you one set of information about the impact at the scientometric level. Africa's proportion of world expenditure R&D is only 0.8%, but it produces about 2% of total science measured in scientific papers. So you could argue it's cheaper to produce science in Africa, which of course it is, for various reasons that one can go into. But here's something that many of you may not know. A study that has just recently been released for the African Union looked at South Africa's scientific papers production in the Web of Science. And if you were to take the African Union, the 54 countries, as a single country, which is, of course, a bit of a trick, but if you take African Union as a single country, in 2005, it would have been ranked 19th in the world in terms of scientific output. 5 years later, it would have been ranked at position number 15. And its growth in scientific papers, which is just one indicator of scientific growth, is the fourth in the world, behind India, China, and Brazil in the last 5 years. So this is one of many impact indicators, and we can elaborate on the rest in the discussion. But the tide that I referred to, I think, is changing, is turning. There's emergence of big science. My second last slide, Chair. He's already referred to AIMS. The SKA, by the way, the Square Kilometre Array in sub-Saharan Africa, which involves 6 countries. When it comes online in 2020, it will be the largest telescope in the world by a factor of 50. It will be 50 times larger than the current biggest radio telescope on the planet. And the data that it will produce will come at a speed of 10,000 times faster than is produced by the current telescope arrays in the world. Just by the way, if you want to look at a success story, the Square Kilometre Array, which is managed by the Department of Science and Technology in South Africa, has recently given 500 scholarships for master's and PhD students in mathematics, astronomy, astrophysics. It has created a huge amounts of jobs at various areas of the country, including the production of a lot of the instrumentation needed for a telescope. So astronomy and astrophysics actually has led to impetus for wealth creation. So my concluding slide, what are the new imperatives? I believe, and it's linked to various research that we've done, we must continue to strengthen these institutions that suffered because of the legacy of neglect. We've just completed a big study for IDRC, Jean referred to that, of science granting councils, science funding agencies. They are emerging, but in many cases they need building of capacity, and we need to invest in them because they play a crucial role in the governance and management of science in a country. We need to keep on investing in chairs and centers of excellence because they become centers where science and innovation is clustered and concentrated. And of course, we also have to invest, because of the brain drain and its consequences, in new doctoral programs so we can have more doctoral students who can become the next generation of academics and scientists in these countries. I thank you.
Thanks, Johann. So I think we're going to have the next economic forum in Regina, because that way your per diem will allow you to see the entire city. All right? And Regina is where my wife's from, so. So thanks so much for that, Johann. We're going to get into the discussion more into how to convert these investments in science and technology into commercial value, into jobs, the process of innovation in a moment. But let me now ask Juliana to come up and talk to us about the burgeoning innovation spaces in Africa. Juliana.
Thank you very much. I'll go straight into it. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you here. It's my second time in Montreal, and sadly, I still haven't seen much of the city either. So hopefully next time. So my background is in computer science and technology, and I am a proud geek. Growing up, obviously, that was not really something to celebrate, but now... Just wanted to get that out of the way. Okay. So let me start really quickly with just giving you a little bit of background on Ushahidi, the organization We started out as a collaborative project in Kenya to provide a citizen's view of what was going on during the post-election violence period in 2008. We've seen the platform. It's basically a piece of software that allows people to report and to say, this is where I am and this is what is going on. They can do this with simple technology via SMS, via email, or social networks. And that simple technology, at that time we thought it was pretty simple. It was just a map and a way for people to report in. But it provided a way for citizens to express themselves. And what we've seen in the past 5 years is the growth of adoption of this particular technology around the world. So something that started out in Kenya is now globally used in over 150 countries, and there are more than 60,000 maps covering everything from crisis mapping in Japan to elections in Malawi, and with IDRC's support to help women in Egypt to track harassment through a map called Harass Map with a fantastic team in Egypt. So it's grown into a global non-profit technology company. And the main idea behind Ushahidi and all the work that it does is to change the way information flows and to empower people to have the tools and to also have the community that can help them get to the next level. And we also we continue to try and have groundbreaking ventures. And one of those, in 2010, my colleague Eric Hersman moved from the US to Kenya and helped to get the iHub going. So, and then we also have this little thing. It's called the Brick, which I will talk about later. But the idea is that we try to come up with ecosystems and try to collaborate and try to create a space and an environment where entrepreneurs can be comfortable and can access the resources that they need. So my brief here is to give you a few thoughts on innovation. And the first, just to look at the use case, the use case around Kenya, is that the innovation landscape is nascent, but it's growing and expanding. Spaces like iHub exist to catalyze the growth of these tech communities. It does this by developing and connecting people, by supporting entrepreneurs, and surfacing information. The iHub was the first such space in Africa, and since then we've seen the growth of many such hubs in Africa. They're upwards, from a recent World Bank estimate, it puts it at over 90 hubs just in Africa alone. And the idea is to nurture the best innovative talent. So in addition to the iHub, there are big companies that are now starting to take root in Kenya. For example, IBM Research. IBM has set up a research center in Nairobi, bringing their big data analytics technology. For those who watch Jeopardy, that's Watson. And they're actually bringing that technology because Africa has complex problems, so it makes sense to have a complex solution. So, that's why they're putting Watson to look at traffic problems and other complex problems. So it's a fertile ground to figure out how to truly solve problems. The other big company that has set up a presence in Kenya is Philips. And they've set up an innovation hub trying to come up with innovative products. Why would these companies set up in Kenya? And when we started out in 2010, we just had the idea that we would create an enabling environment. But it's really great to see that we're not the only ones who think that true enterprises can be made even in quote-unquote difficult environments. And one of the things that we do is also we connect captains of industry. Recently, we had Joey Ito, the director of MIT Media Lab, join us at the iHub, and he was able to share his experiences with not only the entrepreneurs in our network, but also young people who are fresh out of college to be inspired and to help them think globally, where you prototype and make locally, but then you figure out how to take your innovation globally, just like M-Pesa, with it expanding into Europe now through Bulgaria, and also Qatar Airways is now allowing people to use M-Pesa or mobile money systems to pay for their tickets. The other point that I'd like to make is just that there's a need to invest in these creative and global networks. And there's much to do in terms of collaboration to spur more growth and more companies. So the iHub is part incubator. We also have different levels of the building where we try to provide a connection to venture capitalists. And we're yet to see a culture of seed funders. So that is something that is much needed in this space. And there's also a space for more research and development. The pipeline for science and technology is nothing without a conducive environment. So the whole point about iHub is really what we've been able to do, according to Fast Company, is to dispel the notion that Africa's tech community is somehow lacking in ideas, talent, or ambition. There is vast potential in Africa, as mentioned earlier. There is need for capital, and then there's need to invest in these human networks. But I think things are looking bright, and I'll show you a glimpse into the space that I'm talking about, and it'll give you a snapshot of a typical collaborative day at the iHub. If you could please roll the video.
One of the main reasons we wanted to come was to take some of the technology in the Media Lab into places where it could be used in really extreme circumstances. So high traffic, high pollution, who knows? And to do that, we needed to learn a lot from the Kenyans.
It's what's the promise of technology if not to solve problems, if not to make people more comfortable, if not to give capability where you need some capability. That's the amazing part of technology.
So the goal is to design prosthetic sockets, whether you are in Kenya, I'm from Sierra Leone, or Boston, and we know it's a global problem. Irrespective of what the prosthetic leg is, the socket is the most important part of it.
Really blown away by the amount of sort of really bright thinkers, and also just really laid back. So you get people they're absorbing everything, but then if they have an idea, they want to go really deep on it really fast. So that's been an amazing thing.
Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks, Juliana. Well, I wouldn't apologize for being a geek. I think that geeks are taking over the world, and if we have more African geeks, then we better watch out. And I think Thierry may talk to us a little bit about that as well. So, Thierry, can I ask you to come up and talk to us about AIMS and also about the skills gap in Africa? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Naser. Before I go on to tell you a bit about AIMS and the skills gap in Africa, let me thank IDRC, Jean Lebel and his team for the tremendous work you guys are doing. Please keep up with the good work. And good to have you all here, and good to have you, Prime Minister Clark. A few minutes ago, Johann asked me, where do you call home these days? It's a simple question, but sometimes it takes me a few seconds to respond to that question. I said to Johann that it's Canada and South Africa. Montreal was home for me and my family when we first landed as immigrants in the early 2000s from Geneva. And for the past 3 years, I've been partly living in South Africa. So I'm blessed to have two hometowns or cities, Cape Town and Montreal. Very soon I'll start issuing visas for you guys here. You go back. So I think I want to echo what Naser said in a few minutes. But let me take you back to the 2000, 15 years ago. In one of his last acts as president, Bill Clinton said that the number one constraint on growth is the inability of the U.S. companies to hire workers with the necessary skills. That was 8 years before the financial crisis. And 15 years since he made the statement, skill mismatches are still global issues, not just an African issue. And to echo Naser and draw on what Juliana and Johann just said, I wanted to say unequivocally that Africa is the next frontier for 3 reasons. Africa is the next frontier because the continent is the world's fastest growing economic and demographic powerhouse, and is going to remain so for many generations. Africa is the next frontier because for Canada and the rest of the world, Africa is the next stop for trade. The third reason why Africa is the next frontier is because the continent is growing steadily as a scientific and innovation hub on this planet. Yes, there are challenges, but Africa is the new frontier because it's an economic and demographic powerhouse. African economies are growing rapidly with rapid urbanizations and a fast-growing middle class, which is poised to double in less than 2 generations. Africa's consumer market will reach 1.4 trillion by 2020, surpassing China, Brazil, and India. And last important thing, Africa's youth population is booming. The energy, the dynamism, the vitality of Africa's youth, and the hunger for new technologies and innovation is unparalleled. You won't find it anywhere in the world. Second reason why we're confident in sharing this factual optimism with you. Africa is the next stop for trade. Naser mentioned that earlier. The trade between Africa and the rest of the world has grown significantly since 2000 by 200%. Large foreign direct investment have been made in mining, manufacturing, finance, banking, with a significant proportion being spent on scientific research, geological prospecting, and technological services. At the same time, Africa is also growing as a global hub for science and innovation. Many innovation hubs are springing up across the continent, and mega scientific projects like the Grand Inga Dam project, 81 billion in the DR Congo, the Kigali Railway project linking Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, 13 billion. The SKA mentioned by Johann, the Konza City in Kenya, the Nzema project in Ghana. All these projects will require human capital with skills in mathematical sciences. Let me repeat this again. All these projects will require human capital with skills in mathematical sciences. The demand for advanced skills is exploding, and Africa will have to address this demand in terms of skills shortage, skills gap, and qualification mismatch at all 3 levels of the skills pyramid: foundational, professional, and advanced. And this is why we started AIMS more than a decade ago and the Next Einstein initiative. AIMS is a vision to transform Africa through cutting-edge science and advanced skills. AIMS is also a mission to take Africa's best and brightest students and transform them into independent critical thinkers, into problem solvers, and innovators capable of propelling Africa's growth and future development. AIMS is reinventing the 21st century university. AIMS is a Pan-African body of students, mostly from underprivileged backgrounds, who are given opportunities to tackle the main issues facing the continent. AIMS is also an international body of world-class academics from Canada, from the UK, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, all over, drawing into AIMS to sit down and teach AIMS students, dine with them, including Nobel laureates. It's not unusual for our AIMS students to sit down in the same dining hall with Nobel laureates and challenge the Nobel laureate about things for which they have been worldly recognized. This is the Africa we're building. This is the Africa which is in the making. 70% of the students we've trained so far are still living and working in Africa. And ultimately, our goal is to find the next Einstein. And let me say, next Einstein for AIMS is gender neutral. It can be a woman, it can be a man, we don't care. We want the next Einstein to come from Africa. We have been applying a simple formula, the one you're seeing in the background, to addressing the skills mismatch. That formula tells you that one of the main drivers that will help Africa sustain its growth, its economic development, and its innovation hubs is skills equal C to the factor of Q plus 2P plus E. I will expand more on that when we reach the discussion phase. But at this stage, allow me to share with you a short video. And that video has a story. A couple of years ago, we brought together in California some of our AIMS alumni living in North America. We brought them in the same room, in the same rooms as 4 of the world giants: Stephen Hawking, Sidney Poitier, Quincy Jones, and Morgan Freeman. They told the story. Can I finish this before we introduce the video? They told their story, shared their story with all these giants, and they said, Morgan Freeman said, I will not allow this story to go silent. I want to help you tell the world what AIMS is doing in transforming Africa, what AIMS is doing in investing in talent. And that's the result. This video developed by the team of Morgan Freeman. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I'm just going to make one comment about AIMS before we start our panel discussion. To let all of you know, I mean, I think you must have been inspired by this video as I was. But in the 3 or 4 times I visited AIMS, I have to tell you what a privilege it is for Canada to be supporting this initiative, where you have people from such modest backgrounds, from impoverished backgrounds in some cases, the daughters of domestic workers, literally becoming nuclear scientists in Africa, in South Africa, ready to help South Africa address its energy crisis, where you have people capable of modeling avian influenza and food and water and energy scenarios that requires a very advanced mathematics to help solve the problems that Africa and the rest of the world will face. The director of recruiting for the Standard Bank of South Africa was telling me last time I was there that when she recruits for financial modelers for an African bank, that they are unable to find anybody in Africa to fill these positions. And so they have to go outside of Africa. And an organization like AIMS, she is very excited about, because then she can recruit Africans to work on African financial and economic analysis and modeling. So it's very, very impressive, and it's thanks to Thierry and his team.
If getting emotional now, if I can add to your comments, you know, one of the alumni whom you saw in the video, who said each of the alumni a star, is currently a research associate at Yale School of Medicine. And he was born in Cameroon, brought up by a single mom, 6 kids. The mom used to sell herbs in the local market, send all the kids to school. He graduated in Cameroon as one of the best students in Cameroon. He had grand vision, grand plans, wanted to do things for Cameroon and for Africa, but had no opportunities. And no international university would allow him to get into those universities, even though he was the best. So the only option he had left is to go back to a village and to teach math. So he got admitted to AIMS in South Africa, got his master's degree, went to PhD, to Cambridge, did a brilliant PhD. And right now, as I speak to you, Martial is doing research on the linkage between schistosomiasis, HIV, and malaria. Well, it may not mean anything to us. This is a mathematical scientist, but trying to do that research as a cost-effective way to decrease the HIV prevalence in Africa. Why schistosomiasis? This is the world's second most common parasitic disease after malaria, and it particularly affects African women. So when Martial concludes his research is going to help save tens of millions of lives of African women. If you were out there still wondering, why the hell is AIMS emphasizing that much on mathematical science? That's it. He's not a medical doctor, but he's making waves into the medical science, saving lives while sitting at Yale. There are plenty of examples like that. And Africa will only be able to make it to the next level by investing in that area. I talked to the president of Senegal, Ghana, and they said, when you look at African countries, for the past 50 years, 80% of students moving from high school into universities go into humanities. Nothing wrong about humanities, only 20% into science. We have to restore the balance. Thank you.
Thanks, Thierry. All right. So, and Thierry, I'll ask you to come back in on this first question that I'm going to pose to all three of our guests. We've seen a lot of exciting videos. We've cited some strong statistics about investments in science and technology in Africa. But I guess the question that one might ask is the so what question. How do you convert that science and technology into commercial value? How do you convert it into jobs that will lead to prosperity? Johann, let me start with you.
Well, at one level, I think it's fairly self-evident. In the field of science and technology studies, people have always asked, for the last 40, 50 years, is there a fairly clear, linear, even causal link between an investment in R&D and down the stream impact, social, economic impact, whether it's economic impact in terms of job creation, wealth creation, or social impact in terms of quality of life. And of course, it's very difficult to show a clear linear causality because the whole issue is much more complex. But at one level, I think it is actually a no-brainer because when you talk about investment in science and scientific institutions, and especially if you talk investments in universities, and there are many studies over the world and also in Africa which shows that the one thing that industry and business and government and civil society want from universities is high quality, highly skilled labor. That hasn't changed, for the last, decades. And the point of my talk was that we have seen in many African countries that the institutions have been so weakened that they were unable, in many cases, to produce those highly skilled people. Because just think about it. If you've lost tens of thousands of your top academics at universities through the brain drain, who are teaching these people? I mean, you basically had junior people teaching students undergraduate. There are so many statistics that I can give you, but essentially we found in a study that we did 3-4 years ago that out of 40 universities, of the top universities in sub-Saharan Africa, there were so few doctoral programs because the senior people had left. They were not teaching them. Now, and we're not saying that everyone should be a doctorate when they come out of university, but you do need good engineers, medical scientists, mathematicians, and occasionally the art humanities person as well, like myself. I have to declare my interest here because I was trained as a philosopher, and you see where I've, denigrated too. But so the point is that, we need high-level human capital because, all the literature about knowledge management, knowledge transfer is that the most important export commodity of a university or a polytechnic or some institution is high-level people who are highly skilled, who would go out and become the entrepreneurs, the innovators, the job creators in the economy. So for me, in a sense, it's difficult to show that this is a short-term linear causality, but at the other end, I think it's a no-brainer. We need these institutions to be strong to produce these high-level skills. And then, of course, a whole range of other things that go with them. These people will start the incubators, the innovation hubs, etc., that will feed directly into a whole range of other benefits to society.
Okay, good. Thanks, Johann. Juliana, what about you? What's your perspective on this issue? And maybe you can bring in the example of the brick.
Sure. I think one of the key things is rocket fuel. You need seed capital. You need to be able to launch from idea phase to iterate, to figure out what is working, what is not working, iterate again, and then get to the next level in terms of getting users, getting sales. And I've been fortunate to be part of a team where we've actually had a first-hand experience on this. For this is the brick, and it is just simply a backup generator for the internet. The idea behind it is that when your main internet connection goes down because of unreliability of electricity, then it switches to 3G networks. You can put a SIM card right here, and you're able to get back online. And then when you travel between countries, it has an onboard SIM, so you can quickly stay connected or get online without having to switch out SIM cards so much. So the thing is, it took us much, much longer to raise capital to get this going. And we used crowdfunding, which was really helpful as a way to get the seed amount going. And obviously with the support of the Ushahidi board and also a few early people, it still wasn't possible to get going without getting more angel investors. The thing is, the angel investors that were able to get on board for Brick are actually American and British. So the seed stage space, the rocket fuel that many of these entrepreneurs need is just not there. We happen to be a bit fortunate, and obviously it took a lot of hard work, but we'd like to provide an opportunity for others who have ideas to have at least something to go, a bit of a push, so that they can actually get to the next level, because you're not able to borrow from family or friends, and the culture of taking risk, we're very risk averse. I'll just speak specifically for Kenya, but then in speaking with other friends from other African countries like Nigeria, our families do not take it lightly when you fail. They don't take it, they don't see it as a badge of honor. They don't see it that you figured it out, you know. They see it like, oh man, you just wasted my money, you know. So there's a lot that needs to be done in the seed stage, and also when you have small and medium enterprises that get to the point where they need upwards of $500,000 or $1 million, that also gets a bit dicey, because apart from the commercial banks, we really don't have, it's called the missing middle, where funding for that, for those companies to even grow further is problematic.
Okay, good. And by the way, I don't think it's just Africans that are risk averse. Our American friends often tell us that Canadians are too risk averse as well. I appreciate your comments about risk and seed capital. But when I visited you in Nairobi a couple of months ago, when you showed me the brick, and by the way, I want to buy one, because a wireless internet connection and battery backup comes in really handy for some of the places I travel to. You told me, I mean, it's fantastic. You know, a made in Africa, a designed and concepted in Africa solution for a problem that many of us face, that billions of us face. But it's manufactured in the United States. Yeah. So, and the jobs come from the manufacturing side. So what will it take to have something like the brick manufactured in Africa?
We're working on that. One of the first thing is a change in the taxes. We have to pay 100% duty on components. 100%. So we have really odd conversations with customs border agents when I bring in parts in my bag. And that's the first thing that needs to happen. And the second thing is an appreciation of science and technology as a driver for jobs. Because if there wasn't an appreciation for it, currently I think there needs to be more of an appreciation that there's a link between investing in science and technology, including prototyping, and creating that space and creating an enabling business climate so that you can have the manufacturing jobs. I think Nigeria is trying to change it. However, we're in talks with Kenya. We're trying to have that conversation that, you know, how can we make it so that we can start to bring in components and start making things here. So one of the things is we've learned over the years, with Ushahidi, we wanted to give back, so we started the iHub. With the brick, we're learning that we need 3D printing machines, we need milling machines, we need to be able to print circuits. All of those things we're not able to do locally. So we are again, trying to give back by setting up a space where we can try and scrounge some equipment from our partners and to bring in what does it take to create a digital manufacturing industry? That's an open question. We don't have the answer to that. But through the brick and all the other hardware-based companies that are based in Kenya, we're trying to figure out what that means.
Thanks, Juliana. So Thierry, how about you? What's your perspective on sort of converting the investments in AIMS and in other initiatives in Africa into jobs? Perhaps talk a little bit about the AIMS industry initiative.
You know, there are three components to this debate. First, AIMS started in 2003 with one center of excellence. We wanted to scale up, prove that the model and the concept is scalable and can be replicated across Africa. It was really tough. And I joined Juliana on this to get the investment needed to do it. Because most people, and especially the private sector, sees investment in skills development as a waste of money. While the return on investment when you invest on skills is huge because you're building a long-term business. Plus the people who are going to benefit from that investment, I mean the students, the graduates, they will become de facto ambassadors of whoever has helped them achieve and realize their vision. People don't see that. So the message we're trying to carry out to these days is that, number one, investment. The AIMS Industry Initiative is a program that, one of the 5 programs of AIMS. The first one being advanced skills training at master's and PhD level, including research. The second program is public engagement, including improving the quality of math and science teaching. The fourth is this general outreach to raise awareness about science and technology. The fifth one is the initiative we're planning to launch. That is the Next Einstein Initiative. The AIMS Industry Initiative is the program that we designed 3 years ago, that we start implementing 2 years ago, by trying to bridge the gap between the private sector and higher education institutions. We're trying to tell business leaders, trade tycoons, we're here, we're developing a new educational program that is responsive to your need, to the labor market need. We're trying to train people, a young generation of African scientists who will be directly employable. We've talked to many business leaders across Africa. They tell you, we hired many students from math and science department, brilliant students, well-trained. They have book knowledge, but some of them cannot even turn on a laptop. They're not employable. What we want, AIMS, is to reinvent that 21st century higher education institution, the one that trains people who are directly useful for industry. So that's what we're trying to do through the AIMS Industry Initiative. And investment in talent. When you train people who go into business, they improve businesses, they yield return for businesses, whether it's not-for-profit business or for-profit or government agencies. Because the skills that we're providing our students in mathematical sciences are applicable to every single sector of human life, regardless of the sector in which you're doing business. You have decision making to make. You have planning. You're planning. You evaluating your businesses. Using mathematical skills, you can apply to a wide range of field in energy, in health, in transport, in communication. So at the end of the day, the return, we cannot quantify it in monetary terms.
And I would expect that with the kind of revolution that's coming in big data analysis and analytics, and Juliana had referred to IBM's lab in Kenya, which it just set up, that there's one of the biggest job markets that's out there and will be out there will be in big data analysis, and AIMS is producing the types of students that would be able to fill that need. And I reflect also on something that Neil Turok, who's the founder of AIMS, the director of the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics in Canada in Waterloo, was saying the other day, and unfortunately Neil couldn't be with us, but some of it, relates directly to jobs, the focus on science. Some of it comes a little bit longer, so quantum physics, discovery science. There was no real obvious link to the economy for quantum physics. And Neil's just written this brilliant book. If you haven't read it yet, it's called The Universe Within, and he did the Massey lectures on that book. But quantum physics spawned the smartphone, which created trillions of dollars of value and hundreds of thousands of jobs. So I think that the immediate impacts of discovery science are not necessarily always obvious, but they're there in the long run.
They're there. We have an AIMS alumna from Nigeria called Marvelous, who graduated in South Africa last year. She's here in Waterloo doing research at PhD level on trying to develop a microprocessor that will help our computers being more safer and secure. This is something she's working on, and she's planning to return to Africa to lead this research and progress on quantum information.
Good. So how about the private sector? Let's talk a little bit more about that. All of us gave examples, a very promising example that you gave, Johann, about GlaxoSmithKline investing in Africa to open more factories to produce medicines. As they're looking at Africa's growing middle class and growing problem with chronic diseases, they're seeing that this is a market. And so they're going to manufacture more medicines in Africa, but also do research and development on this issue. We have the example of Philips and IBM that you gave, Juliana. And we also know that it's private sector investment in research and development that yields larger returns than government expenditure on research and development. how do we attract more of these multinationals to Africa, and how do we convince more African firms to invest in research and development? Who wants to take it? You want to start, Johann?
Yeah, well, I think that I, in one of my slides, try to refer to that R&D in Africa, in many countries, is still dependent hugely on international donor funding. If you look at the latest African Innovation Outlook, which, by the way, is readily available from 2014, the one area where Africa does not perform well is in terms of private investment in R&D, and that's simply because of the nature of, or the lack of industries devoted to R&D in Africa. So that's why you have to get GlaxoSmithKline, or you have to get NIH institutes investing in clinical drug trials in Africa and so on. So, of course, one of the main responsibilities lies with government. And we keep on saying in science and technology that government must, at the one hand, commit to science and technology in terms of expanding on R&D, which is starting to change, but they also have to create the enabling framework conditions for that. Juliana referred to issues about tax incentives. Many African governments is now waking up to the fact that you have to reward R&D through tax breaks and other means. But you have to create the conditions where private firms, local firms, would see it also financially to their interest to invest in that. Interesting enough, one of the examples in South Africa was that we lost in the late 90s, for various reasons, major capacity in R&D of some of our big companies. In the mining industry, we had a major R&D capability. Anglo-American had huge labs. We lost it to Ireland. Ireland basically had better conditions. The diamond industry, similar examples. De Beers had major R&D capabilities, lost it to other countries. So you have to be very careful. These were industries that were built over a period of a century. A lot of South Africa's capability in deep mining engineering came, of course, because of the discovery of gold and diamonds in the late 19th century. And the Chamber of Mines, which spawned the University of the Witwatersrand, by the way, because the University of Wits came out of the mining school in the 1900s. And it took one decision, or a few decisions, to destroy an indigenous R&D capability in the private industry. On the other side, you have the success story of Sasol, where Sasol invest in chemical engineering departments, which with bursaries and scholarships, those chemical engineering and chemistry students get jobs at Sasol, and Sasol is now by far the biggest single private R&D company in South Africa. So basically, it is about creating framework conditions. You have to nourish and look after the private R&D capabilities that you have, and you have to build them up over time.
Thierry?
I would add two more factors to that. How to attract more investment in the private sector and encourage more African entrepreneurs to really do business in that area. A is to tell the story. Tell the story about what is going on in Africa. Every single business and trade leader wants to set up business where the population is booming and is young. Africa has that. Tell the story about Africa growing as a global hub for scientific and innovation breakthrough. That's coming. Africa is also a continent where some of the mistakes made in Europe and North America in science and research can be redeemed because there's a green field to start from. Apart from telling the story, it's reassuring business and trade leaders that if you set up your business, there are initiatives that will help you get the skilled workforce that you need. That's why it's a continuum. It's a spectrum. And all the components of the spectrums go hand in hand. Because if I'm going to set up my business in Kigali or whatever, in Ethiopia, and I need 50 engineers, and I can't find them, and I have to go to Germany or come to Canada to find them, this is not a great way to do. I won't have the incentive to go in there and set up the business. But if I know that There are engineering schools. There are math and science institutes. There are centers of excellence training people to be directly employable. Then I'm encouraged to go there because this is going to help the local development. So those are the two factors that I want to add to what Johann had just said. If I may add one thing, is the investment. You have brilliant entrepreneurs, you have young, brilliant, bright people in Africa that wants to start something. They have great business plan, but they're not getting the seed capital to start. This is where our government leaders, the African countries, as we're talking about Africa, they're doing this, but should set up a specific investment fund for seed capital provision for these young entrepreneurs. This is something that is going to help them. And this is not charity. This is business. Yeah.
I was reflecting on one of my recent meetings in Kenya where I met with the head of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. And I think that this issue of kind of intermediaries that understand the needs of industry and that can articulate them to a research set of stakeholders, I think is also important in terms of building that link and understanding and getting the private sector to invest in R&D. So we are getting close to the end. We're frankly just having so much fun up here that the time has passed so quickly. So we're going to have to close this session. But I think that there's a buzz, and I'm sure that a lot of you have questions. So I'm going to encourage you to go to the IDRC table. I guess it's a very big table, but there's probably more than one. If you are going to go to lunch, then please join us at the IDRC table and please engage with our panelists. Jean, would you like to come up and make some closing remarks?
Thank you very much. And the IDRC table, for those of you that might be interested, are 302, 303, and 313. So I got this today. When Johann said he was a philosopher and, he had his hard time. When you said you were a geek and you had your hard time, I was trained as an ecologist in the 80s. And the only audience that was really interested about what I was doing was the family party at Christmas. So, there is some hope in science that you can do things that make a change. And it has been for me a privilege to work at IDRC for the last 17 years. And one of my former colleagues was saying, IDRC is there to help to build the platform. Our recipients are delivering the keynotes. And I think today you had a wonderful, a wonderful illustration of this with Johann, Juliana, and Thierry. And I want to thank you and Naser also and the IDRC team for putting this together. It was a very interesting, and I'm biased, but it was a very interesting session. Let me thank you also, the Government of Canada, that has been supporting IDRC for over 44 years and gives the opportunity to researchers in developing region to interact with researchers in Canada and to find the best solution that are seen across the world and can have an influence also in our country. And you provided numbers of illustration of this. Right Honorable Joe Clark, thank you for attending this session. Honorable Monty Salberg, Chair of our board, thank you for attending this session. Distinguished guests, it was an honor and a privilege to welcome you for this session. Et merci au Forum
économique. And thank you to the International Economic Forum of the Americas and the Remy Alfarmi for having given us the opportunity to tell you, thanks because of our panelists, that tell you about the job that we do and how the work that we do has a clear impact on education, innovation, and trade relations between Canada and Africa and the rest of the world. Merci beaucoup.